Greetings friends, I'm Ian Higton, director, producer and editor of Don't Mess With Team Eurogamer, and its sequel, Don't Mess With Team Eurogamer 2, Spice is the Spice of Spice. Critics have described these cinematic masterpieces as so cinematic my face fell off, the peak of cinnamon photography, and cinematic as fook. Making these masterpieces was a lot of fun, but because PUBG's replay system is a little janky, creating maximum cinema can also be quite fiddly and very time-consuming. So, in order to help all you aspiring cinematicers out there make your very own Oscar-worthy cinematics, here are 10 handy tips for PUBG's replay mode. First things first, you've got to record the footage of your cinematic masterpiece. You'll obviously want to do the majority of that in the replay section where you're able to position your camera wherever you like, but I find it's also helpful to record the initial gameplay as well. That way, especially if you're capturing audio at the same time, you have a useful reference tool for the exact timing of events.
What? Chris, no! Fucking no! That's bullshit!
I left some stuff.
I use my NVIDIA graphics card's Shadow Play feature to capture all the gameplay. It's nice and easy to use, but the file sizes can be pretty large at high quality, so bear that in mind if you've got limited space on your hard drive. Now, the way we do the Don't Mess movies is just to play the game and see what stupid stuff happens. From there, I cherry pick the most cinematic moments and build each episode around those. If you're recording something with multiple actors, try recording each player separately first using the follow camera, which is activated by pressing either C or clicking the right mouse button. These work well as safety shots, but also if you position the camera so the player character is facing towards the screen, they can also work as easy cuts for extended bouts of dialogue.
Wow!
That was a really big Molotov cocktail.
Yeah, it certainly was.
To achieve maximum cinema though, you'll want to get a little more creative with your camera work, especially during high-octane action scenes. I spent about 30 minutes recording the exploding vehicle scene in Spice is the Spice of Spice, approaching it from different angles and viewpoints, including those of the enemy players. By gathering a large mixture of close-ups and wide shots, I then had plenty of footage to play around with in the edit, so I could create a sequence of shots that I felt flowed really well. Don't be afraid to go back in and re-record something if you feel like you can get a better shot though. This happened to me loads of times during the editing phase of Spice, and although it's a pain in the arse to go back and recapture these scenes, you'll undoubtedly be happier with the end result in the long run. So there are quite a few controls for PUBG's replay mode, and going over them all individually would be quite dull, so instead I've included a link to a handy list of all the commands in the video description below. If you're serious about making PUBG machinimas though, you'll really need to make friends with F, J and Control plus U. They're without a doubt the most useful commands to know, and getting used to switching between these three will speed up your production time no end. First up, F enables free camera, an invaluable tool for finding the most cinematic of shots. With free camera, you can place the camera wherever you want for static shots, or use it to follow players and vehicles. Just be warned that it's really hard to match the free camera speed with the speed of players who are running or travelling in vehicles. Holding down Control or Shift will slow down or speed up the camera, but it's never really that accurate, and it accelerates and decelerates quite awkwardly. I tend to use free cam for swooping shots like these, as they end up looking tidier than if I was trying to manually match the speed of a moving object. The next command is super useful as it brings up the Replays timeline. Press J and you can then click anywhere on this timeline to be taken to that point in the replay. This is something you'll want to do a lot if you're recording scenes from multiple angles. Be warned though, and this trips up a lot of people, if you have the timeline selected, it will reduce your ability to move the free camera around. Having it active will disable the camera's rotation completely. Plus, any accidental clicks on the screen will potentially snap the camera to another player on the battlegrounds, which can get quite confusing. If this happens, press B to return to your player character and then press J to deselect the timeline, restoring full control of the camera. Finally, Ctrl+U is the command combination you'll need to press in order to remove all the HUD elements from the screen. No HUD is generally the best way to capture the replay if you're going for a purely cinematic video, so expect to spend a lot of your time bouncing between these three commands in order to set up and record your perfect shots. Oh, and FYI, if you remove the HUD before you close the timeline will still be active, even though you won't be able to see it. This will of course restrict your free cam as I explained above, but you can still press J to close the timeline and regain control of the camera with the HUD switched off. The way the replay system works isn't like a true video recording that shows events exactly as they happened. Instead, the system reinterprets the saved game data each time you load a replay. This means every time you skip forwards or backwards along the timeline, the game will need to reload its assets, especially those of each individual player. This can lead to moments like this, where player characters haven't loaded in yet, leaving only their guns floating in their approximate position. To combat this, when recording multiple takes, make sure you skip back an extra 20 seconds or so from the point where you actually want to start recording. Although this adds some extra wait time to the productions, it should give the game ample time to stream in all the player models and outfits, saving you a bunch of faffing around in the long run. Flicking through the timeline can also affect any throwables that you might be trying to incorporate into your cinematic. This is because each time you move to a new point in the timeline, the throwables reset, no matter what stage they were at during the original recording. A good example of that happening was when I was recording the scene where Team Eurogamer jumps from the roof of this building into the smoke.
Wicked.
I thought we were mantling, not just jumping.
I mantled.
Oh, okay.
If I started the timeline too close to the point where we jumped off the roof, the throwable didn't have enough time to fully activate, which meant we just jumped limply into a little plume of smoke. But by triggering the timeline as early as possible after the smoke bomb was thrown, I was able to achieve maximum smoke for the shot. This meant capturing the scene took a lot longer than it should have done, but the waiting paid off because the overall effect was much more cinematic.
Hello.
Hi.
In the first Don't Mess With Team Eurogamer movie, I desperately wanted to do close-ups on our faces as we rode this bike towards certain doom. But try as I might, I couldn't position the follow camera in the right place. For whatever reason, the camera's default position was located much higher than the players' heads, meaning I was constantly having to film up or down at bizarre angles to get them in view. I gave up in frustration in the end and resorted to using these wide shots instead.
Sugar.
Then, when making Spice, I stumbled across a little cheat which meant I could do beautiful close-up shots of each player's face, plus cool-looking interior and exterior shots that greatly improved the cinematics of all of my vehicular scenes.
What? Well, I mean...
Here's how it works. When a character you are following gets in a car, the position of the camera remains relative to where their head was before they got into the vehicle. So you can see in this shot here, the follow camera is too high and is now orbiting a spot above the vehicle. To remedy this, all you need to do is skip back on the timeline to a point in the replay where the players are already in the vehicle. This will cause the camera to recenter itself on the followed player. Now you can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out on them to get some cinematic interior shots or some cool through the windows exterior shots. I also used this method to film close-ups of each player separately so I could cut to them as they spoke.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's such a simple solution to a really annoying problem, and it yields some great results for machinimas with multiple performers. In fact, I'd say this is probably one of the most useful and important tips in this video. It was a literal game changer when I realised this was possible.
That was nice. I mean,
There
I
we
was
go.
terrified, but it was exciting.
To change the field of view and create wider or tighter shots without repositioning your camera, try using the scroll wheel on your mouse. This causes the in-game camera to act almost like the aperture of a camera lens, which can be increased or decreased in size to alternate between a shallow and deep depth of field. Now, with camera lenses, adjusting the depth of field will change the zone of focus, which, basically speaking, means some things will be in focus while others won't. A wide depth of field would cause more things to be in focus, while a shallow depth of field would usually isolate one object or person. Unfortunately, the action in PUBG is sharp no matter what the distance of the objects or how shallow or deep the field of view is. However, it is possible to fake this using a masking tool in your editing software, like I did for this opening shot, where I've blurred the interior of a car, creating a focal point on the players in front. This isn't the easiest thing to do with a moving shot, but if you use a static camera and position it so there's something in the foreground, say a tree branch or a structure, then it should be relatively simple to add a blur effect to it and fake the depth of field.
Team Eurogamer.
It's a car chase! It's a car chase!
Another great use for the mouse wheel is to create a quick zoom, something I did for the final car chase in Spice, which gave me one of my favourite shots in the movie.
Okay.
It's a car chase!
Unfortunately, the movement of the mouse wheel happens in increments, meaning slow zooms end up looking rather juddery. Thankfully, this doesn't affect fast zooms like this, which was simply obtained by rolling the mouse wheel forwards really quickly. I love the way this shot snaps from one car to the other. It adds a sense of speed and drama to the action, and it gives the impression that it's being shot using a handheld camera. It took a lot of tries to get this just right, but I reckon my patience paid off.
Ian,
Yes.
edit this. I'm expecting slow-mo.
So much cinema.
Slow motion is always cool and always uber cinematic, and the best thing is, it's really easy to get super smooth slow-mo shots in PUBG's replays. Just bring up the timeline, change the playback speed to 0.25 and enjoy the instant cinema. Huh, if only real life could have that option.
Oh no,
Give me
hang
a
on.
scope at the very least.
No, he took
Oh,
that.
Johnny, I'm
Nope.
so sad.
Give me the scope!
Team Eurogamer are not very good at staying alive, hence the heavy use of our corpses in each PUBG movie. Sometimes a static close-up on a dead body like this is quite cool and rather comedic, especially if there's some intense schnaffling happening in the background. Recording a static dead body on its own can be a pretty boring shot though, and more often than not, the end result will give the impression that you've just lazily spliced a screenshot into your movie, which is the opposite of cinematic. For a nice easy fix for this predicament, as you're capturing, very slowly move the camera to emulate the sort of shake you'd get if it was being held by a real-life camera operator. It transforms a lifeless flat shot into something that's much more cinematic to look at.
That was cinematic as fook.
I'm gonna die.
Hold on,
I'm
hold
gonna
on.
die. I'm dead.
The final tip I have for you today is about dead bodies. Not real-life dead bodies, mind. That's your problem. I'm talking about PUBG's dead bodies, which can be rather problematic when you're trying to make machinima. You see, every time a player dies in PUBG, their body goes into ragdoll mode, so it can do a lovely, realistic crumple to the ground. Now, the problem with the replays here is that every time you restart the timeline to rewatch someone's death, the game recalculates the mathematics behind the ragdoll, meaning you never get the same death twice.
He's driving! He's driving!
That means setting up shots like this, where the body lands in front of the camera, can take multiple goes to get right. And if you forget to press record and miss a perfect corpse, well, you'll never be able to recreate it. This incredible death spiral from Johnny's carcass was completely random, and it didn't happen in the original recording, but it was totally worth the multiple takes it took for me to finally capture it. So if you're planning on editing an epic death scene, especially one featuring a body travelling at high speeds, you're definitely going to need to bear this point in mind. And there we go, those were 10 handy tips for making the most cinematic pieces of cinema possible in PUBG's replay mode. If you use these tips to make some machinimas of your own, please do share them in the comments below, and do like and subscribe if you found this video useful. Goodbye!